essentially each of the different decking manufacturers has a pattern on the underside of the deck, which corresponds to the correct decking fix to be used, as it were. So firstly, we need to make sure, because if there's a problem with an anchor or there's a problem with our fixing, it's one of two things. It's either that the anchor, or in this case, the decking wedge, has been incorrectly selected for the decking in question, which doesn't happen too often, but it's a possibility. Or it's been incorrectly installed. So obviously we want to try and avoid both those elements at all costs. Now, it's very simple, I think, really, to judge which decking is on site. It's easy for us to look at. Each of them have their own individual patterns. So we know just by looking directly up onto the underside of the substrate exactly which decking is in question. We can therefore select the correct decking fixing. Now, the majority of our decking fixings are two component products. What we have is ultimately, you've got a locking plate here, which is this metal piece. And then we have a casting as well that sits within that locking plate. Okay. So from an installation perspective, we need to make sure that these are correctly orientated within the underside of the deck. Now, in every single decking, we have what we would call a re-entrant channel, which is exactly where this sits within the underside of the decking itself.
The channel that the wedge goes into,
So, for example, and really they all work in the same way, is that this piece, the casting piece, will sit within inside the decking, rotate it through 90 degrees, and then it's locking itself in place. But the locking plate sits over the top of that, and then that just stops it rotating out of the decking. So that's what holds it in place. Now, critically, you then need to use a nut and a washer and tighten that up with a correctly calibrated torque wrench. And from a torque perspective, it only requires 10 Newton meters torque to set correctly in the majority of cases.
Really, it's not very much,
which is not very much yet. So what we do find is that if people don't follow that particular guidance, and I think it's probably sort of human nature to assume that tighter is better, which is certainly not the case with regards to our products. Because if you keep tightening and you tighten that nut and you keep going, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going, then what happens is actually you will end up ultimately cracking that casting. Which ultimately means that the anchor is essentially not fit for purpose at that point. Now, it's quite difficult to do that, but we have seen examples of that happening. And that's really because, in reality, what 10 Newton meters torque looks like is finger tight on the nut, and then about half to 3/4 turn on the torque wrench before it's set. So it's quite a modest amount of torque. So that's a significant issue, shall we say? Not an issue, but it's something that they need to be aware of.